Okay, welcome everybody to this session about help my search page is getting hammered by an AI. If I don't look into that direction, and that's not because I don't want to see the people there, but because that lamp shines directly in my eyes otherwise. So anyway, you find a QR code there. I also show the QR code at the end. That's my slides. So if you want to read ahead or so, or read meanwhile, you can just find the slides there. So this session actually has a bit of a longer history, because at the beginning of the year I realized that one of my sites was getting really, really slow, and the logs showed really weird stuff like traffic similar to this, which had just very, very long search queries that didn't make any sense at all. And the organization I was doing it for was like, what did you do with the search? I said, nothing. I actually didn't work for you the whole week, so I haven't done anything. But I found out that there's more people that had problems with their search pages actually getting really, really slow. And at the same time, there were articles coming up like this one from Ars Technica that were reporting about DevOps basically starting to block whole countries from accessing their website. So as a site builder, I needed to deal with my website. And then I turned that into a talk at DrupalCamp UK in March. And others kept on reporting the same problem. Basically, AI bots were DDoSing our websites. And every time I did this session, somebody else would come up to me and say, oh, well, we can also do this and that. So more DevOps, more people from hosting were coming. I started adding that to my slides. So now I can give you actually a more two-pronged approach. One about what DevOps can do about access to the server, and one also about what site builders can do to keep the search pages in the air. So here I have submitted a talk for the site building track and found myself actually moved to the DevOps track. So just on that note, who's here? Who of you are DevOps? Mm-hmm. Well, there will be some things you know, but also some things you will be able to tell to the people that build the websites you're hosting. And who are site builders? Front-end developers? Back-end developers? Okay, kind of a little bit of everything. There's also something you can do, you might have already done on your site, but also things you can ask your DevOps, your hosting on what to do to help your sites. And just a bit about me. I'm Antje Lorch. Ifrik is my username. I'm a freelancer, so I can give myself my own title. So I think I've moved to Drupal generalist by now. As in, I'm doing site building, I'm doing a bit of backend, I'm doing a bit of theming, and I've been doing that since Drupal 4.6. But let me also introduce my examples that I have, because these are website screenshots from two NGOs where I'm maintaining the site. Both of them have a lot of publications. Like one of them has an archive going back to 1965 or something like that. They're multilingual. They have a lot of tags. They actually only moved to Drupal because of the vocabularies of being able to tag the hell out of everything. So search pages with facets is actually the only way that makes sense on that website to actually find all of that content. So, AI bots. As I said, I'm going to talk about two different approaches. I'm not going to talk about the very heavy interventions that, for example, were mentioned in the Ars Technica article, like Cloudflare building a whole maze to trap AI bots. I'm going to talk about what many of us can actually do within our own projects, often on a smaller budget. I'm going to talk a bit about server rules, and on the site building part, a lot about improving the search page, because that's actually the very nice part. We can, on the one hand, deal with the AI bots and improve the usability of the search page. So that's a win-win. And I'm going to be focusing mainly on configuration and on contrib modules. So just a quick recap, what is a search page? What are all the moving parts that come into it? I'll just quickly run through that. Oops. And I realized I'd forgotten to reset my timer. Okay, so we start with a search index that can be that can be a database, that can be a Solr, where as a site builder we add all of the fields and the processes of what should go into the search index. Let me build a view with that. That's again pulling up all the index context, but it's also going to have exposed filters, full text search, sorting, all of that set in the view. And then in many cases we add facets. In Facets 2, that's a separate configuration where for each facet you go and say, okay, should this be links? Should this be checkboxes? How many results should be shown? Should it have the taxonomy term ID or its label? Should there be hierarchy? What's the sorting order? And then all of those facets are getting placed as a block. And that makes a search page like this, which on the top has basically has the form with the exposed filter, like a full text search. It has the exposed sorting. It has results, in this case in the middle, that can be fields or rendered entities. And on the left here, the facets. And these facets are actually links. They might look like filters, especially when you use checkboxes or so, but they are actually links. So it results in a URL like you see on the bottom here, /cert, /language is English, type is press release, something like that. And that's where the problem starts. Because I can read an existing path like that and say, okay, the author name, we selected Miller in the facet, it's a press release, the language is English, partner organization is 77, whichever that was, region is 20, so that's Brazil, topic was 3, so I think that's deforestation. So I can read that, and it also means an AI bot can read that and generate that. But it can generate weird stuff, like the language should be English and French. The content type should be a press release, a video, a report, whatever I have, all at the same time. So these URLs getting longer and longer. The AI bots are hitting the page, even though it has no result, but I keep on hitting them, and sometimes I come back 6 hours later and do it all over again. So, well, let's start with what doesn't work. There's kind of 5 points that I've come across regularly that people said, oh, do this, do that. Well, there's 5 that don't work. Robot.txt, no, that's just not getting respected anymore. By the way, I love the fact that Drupal is still talking about the Yahoo bots. Maybe somebody wants to update that. But yes, so that's wishful thinking, and even if we would come up with a different standard, I doubt that any of the AI companies would actually be willing to respect that, given that lots of them are priding themselves for breaking things, so they're fine with breaking our websites. Next thing, quite often, is the question on, oh, did you cache properly? Well, first of all, the default now is to actually not cache your search results. Use caching for other pages that are served as they are, but for search results, rather don't cache them. But if you have an old site, like the one I had that was migrated to Drupal about 20 years ago, it still had caching going on for the search page. So I ended up with a situation where within a few hours the database size grew from 2 gigabytes to 18 gigabytes, at which point the hosting put the whole website on read-only, and I couldn't even clear the cache anymore. So yes, check your caching, but actually turn it off for the church page. Another approach that doesn't quite work is just ask people to log in if they want to use the search. That might work if you have a site where pretty much everybody is logged in, but usually that's not the case. And also, personally, I find that somewhat insulting. I now need to build walls around my website so that it can stay in the air. And the next question, well, can we just block the bots? Well, when I started dealing with this in January, February, that was actually one of the first things we could do, because we could see a huge block of traffic coming from China or from bots that were still actually announcing themselves as an AI bot. Blocking by region might work depending on where you are, who your audience is. But one of the sites I had was hosted for an organization in Malaysia about human rights and environmental issues. You don't want to block China there, because actually that's where you want the traffic coming from. So it doesn't quite work. And also, by now, the approach doesn't work anymore, because by now AI bots are spoofing IP addresses and user agent strings. So many of the AI companies that are sending their bots out do know what they're doing. They do know that they are DDoSing sites with all the tools that we know from DDoS attacks. And then the fifth part is, could we just use Cloudflare? Well, opinions about Cloudflare are, I think, divided. But in any case, it's not an option for all sites, either on costs or on privacy issues, for example. Or if you host a site in Spain, because in Spain, on Sunday afternoons, Cloudflare is blocked in order to stop illegal streaming of the football. So, so what can DevOps do? I'm going to talk a bit about rate limiting and banning proof of work or restricting of specific paths. So as a site builder, that's not something you can implement, but that are the words you can use when you talk to somebody on the, okay, we need to deal with this issue. A lot of it is about restricting the access when it comes onto the server before it hits your site, so that the bots can't basically go to specific passes. That can be really relevant if you're using a Solr server or service from somebody who's actually asking you to pay per hit. I think some of the biggest companies basically say, okay, not a flat fee, but for every pass, for every hit, you're going to pay. And if a bot is hitting your site, that is a lot of money. However, some of these actions are also pretty disruptive, because they will cut out actually legitimate traffic to the website. So one thing that got recommended to me is using rate limiting and banning, using fail to ban, which you can get from GitHub in this case. It's configurable, so you can basically, for example, say, well, when I took this screenshot, it was banning an IP for 60 minutes if 100 attempts were made in 5 minutes. The person that gave me the link said, actually, we reduced the amount of time and we're blocking them for 24 hours now. But again, that only works if the bot comes from the same IP address every time. I've heard from people that they basically have the same bot coming from 1,000 different IP addresses, so that doesn't really work. And then for Varnish, there's also a throttling module that somebody after the last session came to me and said, you should try that. I haven't, but I give the name anyway. When it comes to proof of work, Anubis is quite a nice tool. So that's basically ensuring that any client that hits your website is using a modern browser and can calculate a checksum. As in, is this an actual browser from an actual person coming? It's designed to be very lightweight, and as they say, to protect the small internet, the small websites. It's free to use. At least it's free to use as long as you're not removing the image. You can pay for them if you want to have this service more on brand, but if you want to use the free version, you're using this anime character. But they also describe it as a kind of nuclear option, because it can also block kind of good bots. It might block, in certain circumstances, the Internet Archive bot, for example. That's a bit of a challenge, but it might be better than having your site not accessible. So these are options of basically just blocking traffic more in general. Another way which was implemented for me on one of the sites is basically to say, okay, let's just restrict the access to too many facets. So in this case, if somebody comes in with the whole long URL with lots of facets, it's basically stripping out everything after the first 2 ampersands. That works as a stopgate measure, but there's a good reason to say, I want to have a report from Brazil about deforestation. I think it was published in 2000, and it was in Portuguese. That's a legitimate search, actually, and you wouldn't be able to do this. However, apparently it's very simple to implement with a few lines of code on the server. So, and I'm going to give the link to the slides later in case somebody isn't quick enough with the photos. So this can be done on the server. There is actually also a Drupal module for that, where you can say, okay, just set a limit to how many facets the user can select, and that it should actually return a 410 and as this page has gone, rather than a 403. You're forbidden to enter this. That's a Drupal module, so that lives in your site. While the other option I'd shown you was before the traffic hits the site. And the description of the module developer is actually, you should rather have a web application firewall that deals with this. But if that's not possible because of your hosting, for example, then this can work. And then there's the option of kind of doing a bit of both. Let's provide all facets, but not to all the bots. This can be either done by saying, okay, and once you click on the third facet to select, then we're going to ask you to log in. In this case, that was coming from a site where you can instantaneously make an account without any approval. So that works. You basically then say, okay, if you want to continue, now log in, and you get an account straight away. There's also a GitLab repo that is doing something similar. So when you hit the third facet, the browser is then checked. Then there's a check of proof of work to see, are you a real user with a real browser looking at this? So when you do the third facet, it starts going for a moment. I got that from Heine Dijkstra from the security team. He said, okay, we have hard-coded this, but we make the GitLab repo open in case somebody wants to use it. Or if somebody might want to turn that into a module, I think they're fine with that. They just don't give it priority at the moment. But that's a way of finding a balance of trying to stop too much access to the server without removing the functionality of all of these facets. And then there's a few Drupal modules that are actually taking up some of the DevOps tasks. Again, if the hosting isn't cooperative, you can use the facet bot blocker module, or you can use crawler rate limit or CrowdSec module. All of them are modules that are within the site. So, but again, that's restricting the access to the server. But what can site builders do? Because some of these weird and wonderful search facets are legitimate. So there's basically 3 things. We can reduce the page load if we use Solr search. We can use facet 3 with Ajax and better exposed filters, and then add spam protection. So I may start with the reduced page load. The links here are actually how to set this up, because the maintainers of the search module have actually written proper documentation for this. So thanks for everybody for doing that. It also means because it's living on Drupal.org, we can edit it when it needs changing, which is much better if it's a blog post on somebody's site somewhere. So I'm very much in favor of documentation on Drupal.org. So, going back to our search page that we have with our results, our filters, what you need to do is now actually tell the Solr server to actually retrieve the results directly from Solr rather from the database. That's one tick box. And then you go and actually index the whole rendered content. So instead of, or in addition to indexing individual fields, you can also go and say, actually, please render every article in its view mode as teaser or in its view mode as search result. And by checking this checkbox, by changing the type to storage only, it will do that with all of the HTML. So with all of the divs and all of the classes, all of that goes into the Solr. But of course, generally, Solr is really good in stripping out all of this unnecessary HTML and all of this different cases or special characters. So you now need to go to the processors and actually make sure that the HTML stays in there. I found at least 3 tick boxes. It could be that other custom modules are adding more. So if this doesn't work, keep on checking the processors and see whether there's something. And then when you go to the search view, you're actually not displaying any individual fields or a rendered entity. You're actually only displaying this one field that has your whole rendered entity in the Solr index itself. You also need to disable. The access check, because basically now we need to disable everything that would bring views or the site to load the entity, because we just want it from the Solr server. So we need to disable the access check, so make sure you have indexed the content correctly. You add the field. Again, here you need to say all HTML should be allowed. It's amazing on how many places Drupal is really trying to strip out all of this unnecessary HTML. And then if everything works well, it still should look as before, but now these results are coming directly out of the Solr server rather than from the website. But then you're standing there like, does it do that? I don't know. So this is the moment when, as a site builder, you need to actually get into either Xdebug or put a debugging statement in to see, is it actually loading the entities as nodes, or is it pulling stuff from the Solr server or from the Solr index? My tip for that is actually, first of all, try this out beforehand, because you want to know that that your DSM actually works, and not that it doesn't return any results because it just didn't work. Again, I've given actually the lines where you put the DSM in at the top there, because so far I was on the, I can all do this, and then the documentation simply said, and now check this, like, how, where, what? So if you do know where to check this kind of things, add them to your documentation. I've also did another DSM there where you can see, if you can see this on the screen here, that it is actually pulling up as a rendered item the whole HTML, starting with article and classes and everything. Where was this? One note, if you have set something like this up and you change the display mode or the twig template afterwards, you do need to re-index everything, because the rendered HTML is already living in the index. So you won't see any changes. So this means that now the search results come without any entity loads, so you get much faster results. But it still doesn't actually check the bots. Another option to do similar thing like this is actually if you do a whole decoupled search API, but that's a whole different tool. And now we use Facets 3. So Facets currently has 2 branches, Facets 2 and Facets 3. And Facets 2 goes like this, where, as you see, every time you click on one of these links in the facets, it does a whole reloading the page and also changing the URL, adding all of this, all of the arguments into the path. With Facets 3, it now looks like this. You can use Ajax to load all of the results when they change, and as you can see, the URL doesn't change. So now we don't have all of these arguments in the path anymore, which means we're not telling the AI bots what all of these arguments were, and don't give them the tools to start building this enormous big list of links. It's also quite easy to set up once you have enabled the submodule for views exposed filters. So now everything like taxonomy terms that could be used as a facet are actually showing up as possible filter options. So rather than configuring my facet somewhere else, I can actually directly configure them here in the view. So no more snowflake going somewhere else to set up my facets. The whole thing on should the taxonomy term show up as an ID or as a label, that's now all done in views. And with the better exposed filters, you can also then say, should they be displayed like a checkbox, like a link? Should they be collapsed or not? So as a site builder, much nicer to work with. And you don't need to place any blocks. But more relevant now, we have just one search form. So we have the exposed full text field in this case, that's a filter. We have all the facets, which are filters. We have the sorting, also part of the filter of the form, and then the submit button. That works really nicely, unless you have a page like this, where all of my facets suddenly just started getting put on top of the page, and yeah, not really workable. We now actually have a soft limit. So Facets 2 had a soft limit where you could say, oh, show me only like 5 results and then a more link. Now that all these filter options have been moved from Facets to view, so better exposed filter, that got lost. But thanks to both maintainers from Facets and better exposed filters, at the dev days, we actually got this into better exposed filters. I think it's still in the dev branch, so you might need to patch the better exposed filters. Or maybe if you don't have anything to do on Friday, see whether we can get a new release for better exposed filters. So that works quite well. Again, you can do that now in the views itself. But you might actually want to have these facets on the side rather than at the top, because on the top it's getting a bit full. So this is where we now actually need the front-end developer or the themer to come in. In my case, I just actually made a new views template. For some reason, the paths for the views templates don't show up in the Twig. How is that? In the Twig debugging, like when it says, oh, you could use this or that, it doesn't show up, but it works. So in this case, we basically put the facet into something that looks like a sidebar, even so it's active. The content is the whole width, but you can make it look fitting for your site. Again, this is now where we then need the front-end developers. And then comes, of course, the question on the, well, actually, sometimes you want all the arguments in your search path. For example, you might want to link to all of your press releases on the same page as all of your reports or everything. I found 2 different options for that. One is simply turn off JavaScript for a moment, because it fails gracefully. then you can get to pass, copy it out, put it into your template somewhere else, and turn JavaScript back on. Or in the train coming to Vienna, somebody told me about Vue's Ajax history, which is a module that actually, even so you have an Ajax load that doesn't do a page refresh, it is still actually changing the path that you have in the browser window. So you actually then still get the arguments in the browser which visitors can use, for example, for bookmarking, pre-filtered search results. Again, a bot could read that, but by this point we're then in a situation where an AI bot would have need to actually submitted, like selected options from the form and submitted the form to then see what's in the arguments. By the point the bots are doing that, we might need a new strategy. But at the moment, that's a solution that works. And one last thing, for some reason, pretty much every site I'm working on wants a little search field in the banner. Usually I just kind of have my search as an exposed block, but that doesn't work with Ajax. So you can very simply put actually a full HTML block with the form there. Or if you want to have a Drupal module for that, there's also a Drupal module for actually just putting a little search block in there. So now if you type something into that field at the top, it will still bring you back to the search page with your, in that case, full text search already happening. So if you have done all of that, ideally also change the URL of your search page. Maybe rename it from search to publications or all or whatever, so that it's a new URL that bots haven't been aware of. And then actually you should hopefully see a proper drop in traffic. This is from an article I found where somebody pretty much applied the same steps as I've just described. So you can see they had something like 70,000 visits per day, sometimes only 50,000. It sometimes spiked up to 600,000 on these weird facet passes. And on the 22nd of July, they implemented this. And they said, okay, now it's on the same level. And actually, when they identified the traffic, they also said it's a healthier ratio of some bots and most of them actually legitimate users coming to your site. So I think that's a pretty good testament for what you can do on the level of site building to deal with this problem. So in summary, Facets 3 is really good if you don't have too many facets. If you have a lot of facets, then it will require some additional theming to make it look properly. We now have a soft limit, and most importantly, the facets are now a form and not links. And because they are a form, we can use spam protection. You can use whatever your preferred tool is. I've been using Antibot, but I'm sure ever so often there will be a new spam protection tool coming around that might work best for your site, for your accessibility needs, things like that. So, sorry, I think I must have talked really fast. So we can improve the search and can stop AI bots by using web application firewalls, using proof of work. We can restrict access to the facets on the server level by blocking the passes. And then we can move on to indexing rendered entities within the website, reducing the entity load, using filters in a form as facets, using Ajax to avoid page loads, protecting the facets, the facet form with anti-spam measures, and most importantly also by working all together from DevOps to site builders to themers in order to deal with the fact that AI bots are DDoSing our site. And with that, I'll thank you all for listening. And in case... And if you have questions, ask them. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you questions. I think there's a question over there.
Does it look? Yeah. Thank you, Antje. Long time no see, by the way.
Hello.
I loved it, especially the part about offloading things from the database and grabbing them from Solr directly. That was amazing. I get the last sentence, working all together, that we get. We have identified a possible Drupal core issue, which means it exists on all our websites, and we could solve this and mitigate some of the things, at least for legitimate bots, which most AI companies, AI agents are. Drupal core, by default, allows AI bots to continue scanning the search pages in robots.txt. I've made an issue. There is a patch waiting for review. I would love if the community helps and throws some feedback to get this patch done into Drupal core. We have applied it on a couple of sites, and the results seem good. We cannot deal with bad agents, of course, as you understand. So, on working together, I think between that and improving Drupal core, we might see tremendous gains in the next couple of months. So, if you are into community work, there is a core issue already, and in local websites, it seems to do a huge change already.
Okay. What is that patch? How do we find that? In case somebody wants to work on it?
Shall I give you the ID?
Yes, and then the ID will be in the recording. Yes, please.
3550083.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Can you repeat it?
3550083.
Hi. Yeah, I think we've all had a problem with AI bots. We recently implemented Facets 3, which was like a really good solution. The only thing that I was a little confused was like we also implemented a custom template, but better expose filters also you can turn it into a block. So why do you say that that's not an option?
Maybe it has changed by now, but at the moment when you put the better exposed filters in a block, the results are going to be loaded with Ajax without a page load, but the block didn't get renewed. So I would have a page that says, here's 170 articles, even so I'd now applied a filter for a facet and there were only 30 articles, but it would still say 170 in the block. I knew there was an issue to actually make sure that the blocks are also loaded with the Ajax to change. But if not, then you have this weird disconnect that the results and the facets don't quite line up anymore. If you don't show, for example, the numbers in the facets, that still might work, because then the user isn't quite aware that you now have less results. But that kind of negates a bit the idea of facets, that you have an idea on how much there actually is.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
But I think there's an issue for finding a way of loading the blocks when you do the Ajax as well.
Hi, thank you for the sharing of your techniques. And I would like to share I have a lot of experience recently because I had the same problems on many websites. So, maybe some point we can discuss later. But I've shared a module, cookie bot protection, about a specific kind of bot that is really aggressive because some bots are not just AI to collect data, but just spanning and doing a lot of calls and trying a lot of URLs different and maybe from many IPs also. But so I made just first protection cookie bot because I don't like proof of work that can have accessibility issues for computers that are small or and can compute or maybe some other kind of browsers. So that's why it was just the fact of this kind of bot. It just spamming a URL, but without making a redirection or without reusing a cookie at the next call. So the purpose of this module is just to make a redirection and inject a cookie if the cookie, the cookie is the challenge, if the cookie is given in the next time, so it's not about, or maybe a headless browser. But it makes a first level of protection. There's also user agent filtering and paths with regex, whitelisting, or so. It's another module that can be used if you need. And I have another technique.
So could you repeat the name of the module again?
It's
for
a
everybody.
cookie bot protection.
Cookie bot protection.
So,
okay. Thanks.
And there is another way to protect from spamming bots because I had specific attacks from thousands of IPs. And I don't know if you know about GA4 fingerprints.
No, that's a new one to me.
Yeah, okay. It's really powerful. Maybe I can have some time to explain it, just a few minutes. Or maybe later.
We have 3 minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions from somebody else. Otherwise, give us a short rundown on G4 fingerprint.
So GA4 protection is the evolution of GA3 protection. And so the idea is when a browser wants to initiate a TLS connection with a server, you have to share information about ciphers, version, extension. So that's make a fingerprint, a unique fingerprint, or pretty unique fingerprint of which device communicates with you. And most of these aggressive bots are using a lot of proxies, but the HTTPS connection has to be done by the browser or the tools, the spamming tools itself. So if you can extract the GA3 fingerprint, so for HA proxy you have a module that can give you what is the fingerprint. You can add a rule in your fail to ban if you want to block them.
Okay, thanks. Okay. And any other question? Any other ideas on how we can deal with this? Otherwise, I thank you all for coming and have a nice DrupalCon further. Thank you.